Hi everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our Autocross Novice School. I'm Stephen Duckworth. I'm a member of the Central Carolinas region of the Sports Car Club of America, and if you're interested in parts 1 and 2, they're linked down below in the doobly-doo. In part 3, we're going to talk about reading a course, forming a plan, and driving it. So, I think it's safe to say everyone knows what this is. You've probably done connect the dot puzzles as kids. You may still do them now. If you do, it's cool. I don't judge. But I think we can all identify what this puzzle is meant to be at this point. Now, it can be done with nothing but straight lines, and so can an autocross course, but it's not really good in either situation. So you want to learn to read the dots and know where to actually put in the curves. When you read it beforehand and link the dots the way they should be, everything works way better, whether we're talking about this duck or whether we're talking about driving an autocross course. So if you haven't figured out my analogy yet, when we autocross, we're just playing connect the dots. This is a course I designed a few years ago, and it literally started off with that purple line. I drew a general line where the course would take us, and then I just started filling in elements around it. And if you look, there are no sharp corners, there are no straight lines, it's just a proper connect the dots puzzle. The first part of walking a course is identifying the key cones. Not all cones matter, and if you paid attention to that last slide, you saw at least one that really didn't. Sometimes course designers will put in cones to trick you or sucker you in. Use your course walk to find the ones that you need to care about and the ones that you need to focus on. Next, you have to look at how it links to the next sector. Is there a long acceleration zone after it, or is it immediately into another turn the other direction? This is where you think about how you actually have to drive that cone. Are you backsiding the cone? Are you just coming in hot on it and trying to get close to cut distance? You have to find the key cones, but remember, you're still looking big picture, planning ahead, and figuring out how you connect those dots. Remember, look ahead. Other than identifying key cones, let's get into how to make the most of a course walk. Since you've obviously never heard me beat that dead horse of look ahead, let's talk about that again. When you're walking a course at 2 to 3 miles per hour, now is the time to look ahead. Now is the time to pick out the cones that you need to focus on. It's way easier when you're walking than it is trying to figure it out once you're driving it at speed. Next, take a second to pause in the sweepers and look behind you. See if your ideal line is even achievable. Look back from the apex, see how you're going to need to set the corner up to get there. Look back from the corner exit and see if what you thought was the apex actually was. Draw the line in your head as you're walking it to see if it's anywhere near the realm of reality. Next, look at the ground around you. Is there a surface change? Does it get gritty? Is it bumpy? Does it fall off camber? Does it camber in? Look at these things while you're on your feet so that you're prepared for them when you drive. And last, pace out the elements. As you get more experience, you'll get a better idea of how fast you can take certain elements based on the distance between them. But even if you lack the experience to know that, you'll learn whether you're looking at even spacing between cones or if the course designer is throwing a trick at you. Before we can go much further, let's talk about what we mean when we talk about backsiding cones. I know I've said it a few times in a previous video, but it's important to understand what we're actually talking about. So the easiest way I've heard it explained is that when you drive it like you're trying to run over the back corner of the cone with the rear tire of your car as you pass it. Let's look at what that means in reality. When you look at a slalom, this is what you think of. It's fairly straightforward, sine wave type curve that passes by each cone right at the trough. What you want to do though is back up your inputs, be early on those cones, and backside them. You see how we're running over the backside of the cone with that line now. Get your turns done early before you're at the cone so that you're passing them as you're already starting to straighten up the wheel and set up for the next side. Now, the reason this matters is that you can get back on throttle earlier if you're earlier on cone. If you're driving the normal line, you have to almost pass the last cone before you can get back to the throttle to avoid knocking it down. If you're early, if you're backsiding cones and you're slaloming like you should, you can get back on the gas about 2 cones before the finish because your only goal is to not knock those 2 down. And you have to slalom every cone. Don't get lazy at the start of a slalom, go blasting in past the first cone because then you end up late. You come in hot, you start having to exaggerate your steering inputs just to get past the cones, and you lose tons of time. And worst, you can't start accelerating until you're basically out of the slalom completely. So get into your slaloms early, get your pace set, show patience at the start of a slalom, and if you get that right, it's aggression on the way out. Now let's zoom in and look at some of this course from earlier. The double cones here are the actual start lights. Anything before there is free. Use that space and set yourself up. Next, we can pretty immediately identify the element up here as a key cone. It's all by itself, and it's pretty safe to assume that one matters. If you look after it, it leads into a pretty big acceleration zone with minimal input required to get through that six pack, and honestly minimal input on the slalom. So what is my plan here? When I stage, I'm going to try to get myself wide through this gate. I want to get as close to this cone as possible and start setting myself up to the left. I want to get wrapped around this cone and back on throttle as early as possible. When I go, I shouldn't be out here in no man's land and have to check up, but I want to brush by this first cone. This is my key cone. After that, we go down into the slalom. Find your pace, set your pace. It's only a couple slalom cones, and then you're back on throttle. Once you get past here, you're home free. These two six packs are really a visual trick. The only two cones that actually matter in them are this one right here and this one right here. You're trying to thread the needle in between those two. It's almost like a gate that's just sideways from where you are with a different way of looking at it. Once you've threaded that needle, you should be carrying a lot of speed. Don't hit this guy. You're going to want to get close to it so you can set yourself up, but don't hit it. And now we get into the section where we talk about the one that doesn't matter. I think everybody can pick out this cone does not matter. Ignore this cone. It exists to trick you. So the way I'm going to drive this and the way I'm going to walk this, I want to set myself up and get my turning done on this top cone right here. It's going to push out wide. I'm going to come down close to this wall out here. And when I walk the course, I'm going to stop somewhere around here. And I'm going to look back at this cone right here. And I'm going to see, how do I need to set up to get myself to this point? After that, I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to get to the entry of the slalom. And I'm going to say, okay, I want to be early on this cone. I want to backside this cone. How do I make sure I can do that from here? Look back at the thing and see if your line matches what you should be able to do. All right, next is the slalom. This one is what we're going to refer to as a closed offset slalom, where you're actually moving, side to side in an exaggerated amount. It's pretty much the same thing. You're going to backside the cones. You're going to be early on it, and then you can start rolling into throttle around here. It's closed offset, so you can't really get aggressive on that exit because you're still having to go way over to the right to make that finish. And next is what I'm going to call the technical section of the course. When I use the term technical, I know a lot of people use technical to mean slow, but what I mean is there's no line choice. The cones are set up so that you've got one driving lane, and your entire goal is to just drive it as fast as possible. There's no thinking, there's just driving. So when you come in here, these cones really constrain you. You got this constraining cone right here that keeps you from pushing out wide. You're going to wrap around this one and get on the back side of it, and then you're going to thread the needle through this little gap. You're going to avoid this constraining wall right here and get yourself into a slalom. There's not a lot to think about, just drive. Now let's zoom in on another section of the course. This one's going to give you a little bit more line choice to it. So the key cones here are going to be this one to the right and then this one to the left. Because if you look, they lead into a very big acceleration zone. The next cone left doesn't really matter. The line pushes close to it, but it's fine if you carry speed around here and you let yourself push out wide. As long as you can get in before this cone, that's what we care about. Next, we're going to come down into the six pack. And in the six pack, I'm going to use that last cone on the left as my focal point. And now we enter the rope section, as in all the rope you need to hang yourself. That cone up here obviously is a key cone. And here's where you have to really look ahead, because how you drive that cone is determined by what's next, which I cut off on purpose. Over here on this 3-cone bit, if that's the start of a right-hand sweeper, that means you can carry a little bit more speed around this corner and you can push out closer to it, because you're going to start wrapping on it and you're going to have to start braking for it. If, on the other hand, right past this 3-cone is a left-hand gate and you're starting a slalom, all of a sudden the way you drive this, you're going to need to get it wrapped more and get it up here where this purple line is, so that you can enter that slalom backside that cone and stay ahead of yourself. You have to look ahead at what's coming up to determine how you're going to drive an element and how that's going to link to the next one. Now I want to talk about cutting distance versus carrying speed. As a general rule, the sharper a corner is, the more you want to cut distance on it. You can't carry huge amounts of speeds around sharp corners, so do what you can to save time. On other corners, it's often worth giving up a little bit of distance so you can keep your foot in the throttle and carry speed through it. Set yourself up so you can expand that radius and keep your speed. Carry that speed to the next element, carry it through the next acceleration zone. And sometimes that means figuring out what your margin for error is. If there's an element that's right after something and overcooking it means you're going to just blow past the next thing and take a DNF, there's no margin for error there. If the next corner gives you a bit of space where you could overshoot your grip, like that last slide we saw, where you come around the left and you push out to the right, you push out way wide of that one cone there, as long as you're keeping your foot in it, that's fine. You've got plenty of time that you can get it pulled back in and get it online before you get up to that cone that constrains you on the right. I've said it on many course walks that I'm going to keep my foot in it here, because even if I end up way out here, I've got time to get it back in before the next element. So this is where you trade distance versus speed, not on cones. In general, you need to be as close to cones as possible. You're cutting time off if you are a foot off, if you're 6 inches off a cone. And there are people who have done that math, and they can tell you that for every inch off a cone you are, or every foot of distance you give up in general, there's the equation and you're losing so much time. But you know what? We're not doing that math here. I hate math. The entire point of doing a course walk is to form a plan. Get it into your head, find your focus points, and know what you want to do. Now, some people can remember every single cone on course. They'll remember the distance they paced out between them. And some people can't. If you can't remember every cone on course, what you need to do is pick out a few areas to focus on. And just drive the rest as it's in front of you. Look ahead, look ahead, look ahead, and you'll be able to drive those. But it's always important to remember that plans are malleable, and you're almost certainly going to have to change your plan. No plan ever survives first contact with the enemy, which in this case is driving. Things that you thought were going to be fast may fall off camber, or they just may end up driving much tighter than they walked. Things that you thought were going to be slow may end up being just insanely fast. With every run, you should have a plan before you take to the course. If you have a co-driver, ask them as they're sitting in the car, what's your plan? Make them ask you before you run, what's your plan? Get it in your head, have that plan before you drive, because it's way easier to come up with it when you're sitting in the car still than it is when you're approaching an element at 50 miles per hour. Now, when we do national events, we only get 3 runs to get it right. So the general plan that I follow for those 3. Run number 1 is full attack. I want to drive the course how I walked it, fill out the car and the course, and take some chances on it. Depending on how run 1 went, I'll adjust for run 2. If run 1 went well and I have a decent time in the books, I'll push even harder on run number 2. If it was dirty on run number 1, you kind of dial it back a notch and just get a safe run in the books. Because the ultimate goal is to use run number 3 to put together what you learned from those first 2. You have that foundation built so that you've got a decent run in the books. And then run number 3, you're going out and you're chasing every 100th of a second you can get in every single corner. But that said, general plans like this aren't always a good fit. In 2016 at Nationals, we were the first group and we were watching the rain rolling in as we were getting ready to take our runs. I knew that none of us were going to get 3 dry runs, so I felt like I had to get it done on the first. A few days later, fifth run group on the plain side had the same situation, except instead of a shower coming in that's going to wet the course and just make it slick, they had an absolute downpour coming. We watched a wall of clouds just rolling in, rolling closer, and everyone there knew they had one shot to do it. Adjust your plans, make it work for what you're facing. And remember, on 2-day events, you have to keep yourself in the running for that second day. If that means taking run number 3 to dial it back a little more after you've had 2 dirty runs so you can get a clean, safe run in the books, do it. You have to keep yourself within striking distance going for day 2 instead of just going for broke on day 1, coning out for the day, and being stuck in that situation, because it sucks. So in closing, find what works for you. If you're the type of person that can remember every cone on course and every distance, awesome. If you're not, make sure you can pick out those areas you have to focus on and just remember to look ahead for everything else. Figure out how many course walks it's going to take you personally to get that into your head. Next, drive the course, not the car. It's a phrase I've used a lot and I've gotten a lot of puzzled looks about, but the course is always the same for everyone. You can jump in 10 different cars in a day and the course is going to be the same. Teach yourself to figure out how to drive the course first and foremost and let the car come to you. You'll figure it out in a few corners, whether it's pushy or loose, and as long as you concentrate on hitting your marks and driving your plan, you're going to be fine. Seat time is the single best mod you can do because you're fixing the driver, like we talked about in part 2. It's the only mod that's going to follow you every day for the rest of your life to every car you ever set foot in. So get out there and do as many events as your time and your budget allows. Travel around, get experience, and you're going to start seeing improvements. And thanks, everyone. I really hope you got something from this series. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below or shoot me an email. And I hope to see you in an event, preferably nationals, sometime in the future. Thanks.